Good morning. My name is LaDawn, and I'm an entrepreneur. Welcome to Support Group. This is where no actually means not now, where that's a terrible idea actually means, hey, I'm onto something, and where failure means, hey, that's a great reason actually to just try something new. But really, my name is LaDawn Mantegi. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Social Enterprise Initiative, one of your hosts today. Welcome to Georgetown and the McDonough School of Business. I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome those who are watching today's summit on live stream. We hope you will not only watch, but also participate in the conversation, and I'll speak to that in a moment. As Bill Novelli and Bob Stallman indicated, you all are not the typical group who would get together and talk about things like the effects of a new pest infestation on agricultural commodity prices, or that it took 50 minutes last night to get to the closest emergency room because your daughter was running a temperature of 102 degrees. Or that your online accounting class kept cutting in and out because of the slow internet speed where you live. Or whether the goats you're raising will be worth more to the restaurant chef if they're grass-fed or apple-fed like Marlon Buckner's, or beer-fed as my nephew's goats are, and just for the record, the goat prefers Modelo Negro. I heard applause on that one. But you were each selected to be here because of a particular role that you play. You are each part of an important ecosystem, that village that Bob referred to, which surrounds rural entrepreneurs and helps them thrive. Perhaps you've mingled a little bit as you've arrived today and registered, and I encourage you all to talk to at least 3 people that you don't know and think that you should get to know. Because today is about learning something new, meeting someone new, and acting on something that you're inspired by and have the ability to do when you leave here. Okay? So, before I introduce our panel, let me ask. So, who in this room is an entrepreneur? Raise your hand. All right. Who's an investor, a funder, a banker, a money person? Raise your hand. Raise your hands high. You're the ones who need to be seen. All right, who represents government? All right. Teachers or mentors of entrepreneurs? Who in here is? Got one teacher here? Another one? All right, very good. I hope all of us think of ourselves as mentors of entrepreneurs. Who here is from a rural community? Rural, loud and proud, where are you? All right, there we go, there we go. Who competed in the Rural Entrepreneurship Challenge? Ah, we got some competitors in the room. Farm Bureau members. Aha, there we go. Who here doesn't fit in a category that I mentioned? All right. Rural broadband, all right. Who else? Who else didn't fit? Rural broadband. All right. Very good. Anybody else? Yes.
I'm here from Village Capital, which is actually kind of all of these categories. We have a for-profit investment fund and a nonprofit training program for entrepreneurs.
Village Capital. So we've got mentor and money. Get to know her. All right. Who else? Back there, yes. Fantastic. Teach for America, keeping young people in small towns. Excellent. All right. Well, so as you can see, we've got a different group of folks here. And my last question for now is, how many of you are tweeters? Twitterati. Excellent. Excellent. So, my Twitterati, let me tell you, we are live tweeting all day from the summit and from the handle Ruralpreneurs. We invite all of you here, and those of you who are watching us on the live stream, to participate in the conversation and follow it at hashtag StrongRural. That's hashtag strong rural, and I think we have it somewhere. Anyway, hashtag strong rural. All right, so a few additional points for the day before I introduce our panel. We do not have an official break this morning before lunch. Please get comfortable, move around, get your coffee, get your tea, everything is set up, and get to know people at your tables and the other ones. Restrooms, out the doors, straight across to the right and the left. You will also see that at your tables, there are a few items. You'll see there are some sticky notes. Eric Page, just hold up the sticky notes. Show them the sticky notes there. All right, there's sticky notes. As the day goes on and throughout the program, we'll have interaction and Q&A. We want you all to, lob your questions, not only at each other, but to folks who are speaking. But on that board back there, you'll see that there is a sheet of paper that says, I want to know more about. If you don't have an opportunity to ask your question, or if there's something that you just want to know more about, we will try and get to some of those things today, but we will also respond to anything that you want to know more about, whether it's something that somebody spoke to or didn't speak to. We will get back to you on those things. So write it on a sticky note and stick it up there. You may also tweet your questions that you have to Strong Rural. You'll also use the Post-it notes this afternoon in the walking in your shoes exercise. And to that point, on your tables, you'll see that there are scenarios that each table will be working through when Jeff Reed takes the stage this afternoon. But you can read them, think about points, you can write on them as we go through the panel discussion and hear the keynotes, but don't do anything else with them, all right? Lastly, you are all participants. You are not passive attendees. You're here to work, all right, and we expect you to do so. So, to get to the day's questions, let's get started with the panel tackling the challenges. For 16 years, Dave Alwan had a successful meat business in Bartonsville, Illinois, outside of Peoria. But he had a vision. Not of a shark attacking him, but of going bigger with the business. And with some financial backing and some business mentoring, after pitching on the national hit TV show Shark Tank, Dave's meat business is now selling wholesale, mail order, online, catering, and more. Dave is also a proud Farm Bureau member. Dave, will you join us up here? Books, apps, helping kids learn, that's what Zubeen is about. And the passion behind Zubeen's chief mom, Jordan Lloyd Bookey. Jordan talks about 3 core values that drives her internet-based business: love, inclusion, and remarkability, all to help kids learn and to thrive. Like Dave and Echo Valley Meats, Zubeen was also featured on TV Shark Tank. Jordan, come on up. So getting a business off the ground requires money. Back in January, when my colleague Jeff Reed and I interviewed several entrepreneurs at Farm Bureau's annual convention, we asked, where do they turn to when they look for funds for their new business ideas? And the overwhelming majority said loans, and mainly through their banks. A couple weeks ago, I had lunch with our next panelist, and we talked about the changing landscape and business model of banks. It's an important topic to discuss today. Jeffrey Humber is a senior vice president with PNC Bank. He's a businessman as well as a staunch education advocate. And he grew up in Rich Square, North Carolina. Jeffrey, will you join us? When we did the interviews in January of these entrepreneurs, we also found that a couple of them had tried crowdfunding as a vehicle for financing their businesses. Both an entrepreneur himself and to speak on the topic of crowdfunding is founder and CEO of StreetShares.com, Mark Rochefeller. StreetShares is a free members-only marketplace where investors bid to provide shares of commercial loans to Main Street businesses of their choosing. And likewise, business owners are given the opportunity to pitch their loan request directly to investors. Mark, come on up. So, what's it like to be a business in a rural town? How do you fund it? How do you market it? How do you sustain it? Becky McCray believes communities are key to helping small businesses succeed. As a rancher, but also a small business owner herself, she's succeeded, she's failed, and she talks about it in her book, Small Town Rules, her blog, Small Biz Survival, and in venues like today. Becky, will you join us? And then you may ask, what do a playwright, an entrepreneur, and a White House senior advisor have in common? Well, at some point, they were all probably starving. But if you're Doug Rand, who is all of these things, believe it or not, at another point, you're an example of success. So, as our moderator from the White House Office of Science, Technology, Policy, the Assistant Director for Entrepreneurship, Doug Rand, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, LaDon. And thank you all for joining this morning. Thanks to Georgetown for hosting this fantastic event and for all the different co-sponsors for putting this together. I'm not here to talk very long. I'm here to get some amazing and insightful responses from the panelists that were so ably introduced just now. So I'll just speak briefly just to give a bit of the administration context here, why we're all here together. As will come as a surprise to no one, the president has prioritized the needs of entrepreneurs, both in rural parts of the country and other parts of the country from the very beginning. He cares deeply about ensuring that every entrepreneur has a straight shot at success for reasons that are clear to everyone. The entrepreneurs, as we know, hit above their weight in terms of job creation in this country. And it's not just in the obvious innovation hubs, and it's not just in the technology industry, but the data show that entrepreneurs are creating the lion's share of net new jobs in all parts of the country and across industries. That said, entrepreneurs also hit above their weight when it comes to innovation. As I'm sure everyone on this panel can confirm, entrepreneurs are not incumbents, and so they are swinging for the fences and pursuing the kinds of innovation that larger, more incumbent firms may not feel incentivized to pursue. Just last week, the president was at a startup campus on the West Coast, and I think really addressed the kinds of things that he and the administration have been doing over the last several years to try to promote entrepreneurship as a source of core American competitive advantage, whether that's in terms of increasing access to capital. And you heard from Administrator Contreras-Sweet about all the great things that the Small Business Administration has been doing to expand access to capital through lending and other means all across the country. The president signed the Bipartisan Jobs Act, jumpstarting our Business Startups Act a couple of years ago. That's already increasing access to capital for a range of companies around the country and is poised to expand a responsible national framework for crowdfunding in the near future, and we'll probably want to talk a little bit more about that. The president launched the Startup America initiative, which continues to engage in a number of interesting public-private partnerships we'll be hearing about. One that I want to highlight again that the SBA has really led on is a growth accelerator challenge that awarded small but impactful amounts of money competitively to 50 startup accelerators all over the country, so not in the obvious places. Some of them include accelerators focused on getting restaurant entrepreneurs off their feet, getting new farmers off their feet in rural and other parts of the country. It's very exciting, and we're looking forward to seeing how these accelerators all over the country are going to bring more mentorship and access to capital to a greater diversity of entrepreneurs. Then something else the president talked about last week that I think is important to really underscore is that the Affordable Care Act is an incredibly pro-entrepreneur piece of legislation. In addition to all of the other benefits that are more commonly cited, having affordable care expanded to more people unlocks people from employer-sponsored healthcare coverage. So we see that in the data. already, especially among younger people who've been able to take advantage of the Affordable Care Act for the last couple of years, rates of entrepreneurship have gone up. When you can get affordable care and don't have to worry about being locked out due to a pre-existing condition, can actually go on the open market. That de-risks the personal risk of being an entrepreneur and allows you to focus on the important risks like product market fit and marketing and capital. So for those of you who are either at your seats on your devices or out in the wider world watching the live stream, the hashtag for today, I'm told, is hashtag #StrongRural. So you can tweet questions and we're going to want to have an interactive conversation. The goal of this panel, I think, is really to address what are some of the experiences that are common to all entrepreneurs across the country and walk a mile in those shoes. And I think as part of that, we'll probably identify some of the things that are maybe unique to what it means to be a successful entrepreneur in rural areas in particular. So we're looking forward to your insights on that. And so to start, I think we're just going to go straight down the line. Everybody gets 30 seconds. You're all entrepreneurs to give the elevator pitch of who you are and what your business does. And we'll start with Becky.
Okay. My name is Becky McCray. I run a retail liquor store and a cattle ranch. And then I also write and speak about small town business because that is who I am. That is what I do. So you find me at smallbizsurvival.com. And I also co-founded an online startup that helps small destinations use social media to reach out to new people to bring to their destination, and that is an example of small town rule number 3, which is have multiple lines of income to survive.
Thanks, Becky. Dave.
Hi there, I'm Dave Alwan from Peoria, Illinois. I own a meat processing plant in Bartonville, which is right outside of Peoria in a town of 6,000. I'm third generation cattleman, farmer, and meat processor. Split off of my family in 1998 from a very successful business to go on my own because I had a different vision. Wanted to get into more of the mail order business back in 1998, which my family thought I was crazy because they didn't even know what the internet was back then. Went to Germany and Denmark. I wanted to become one of the best sausage and ham makers in the country, so I went to Europe and got trained. Started raising cattle, breeding cattle artificially, showing cattle on a national level, so I wanted to understand our industry from conception to consumption and decided to take it to the next level.
Hi, I am Jordan Lloyd Bookey, and while I am from DC and live here in the district, I am originally from Des Moines, Iowa, and come from a long history of farmers and meat packers in the Midwest. And we were all entrepreneurs and had started their own businesses along the line. So I am the chief mom and co-founder of Zubeen. And at Zubeen, we help families discover apps and books either at home or at their local library. We've started partnering with public libraries around the country. And that means that we have a team of children's librarians and educators, experts around the country who are looking through books and apps and sort of making sure that they're tailored in a personalized way to each individual child. So you would come on and tell us about your child, your loved one, and then we recommend and send very personalized selections to your home.
I'm Jeff Humber. I'll give you the quick PNC pitch first. Fifth largest bank in the country, super regional, maybe most important for this group, significant presence in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, other rural communities. Now, why is the guy in the three-piece suit who's not an entrepreneur sitting on the stage? In my conversation with LaDon, just a quick thing. I noticed something over the years. Those of us who are from the South, when you ask us where we're from, we'll tell you where we grew up. When you ask my northern colleagues, they'll tell you where they live. I'm from Rich Square, North Carolina. Rich Square, North Carolina is a town when I was a kid of 1,200 people. I'd like to say I'm the only Wall Street investment banker who ever picked cotton, shook peanuts, pulled corn. And I can't say that I terribly enjoyed it, but I did it all. I think towns like my town, which is now a town of 800 people, these are dying towns, and I think it's important that they survive. So I'm interested in today's subject. I made the mistake of mentioning that to LaDon, and so here I sit.
And good morning, my name is Mark Rochefeller. I am one of a generation of veterans who came back just as the financial crisis was beginning. And so we have co-founded StreetShares.com to solve this problem and serve our fellow veterans and everyone else who's having trouble accessing capital. StreetShares has been described in the media as Shark Tank meets eBay. In essence, small businesses and entrepreneurs can pitch for a loan directly to retail investors and institutional investors and funds who compete in an eBay-like fashion to fund a portion of their loan. We consolidate all of the lowest interest rate bids into a single loan and then offer that to the entrepreneur. You can learn more at streetshares.com. And I think I'm here both to talk about my experience as an entrepreneur and then also talk more generally about access to capital issues.
Fantastic. See, these are real entrepreneurs. They did it fast, crisp, and we got everything we need right off the bat. So the first question I would ask is the origin story. Let's go a little bit deeper, right? We'll start with Dave. How did you first recognize the opportunity that you wanted to pursue, and what turned out to be wrong about that initial set of assumptions, and what were some of the skills that you didn't have right off the bat that you needed to develop really fast in order to expand?
Great question. So my father and my uncle were born in Lebanon, came to this country in 1942, basically with the clothes on their back, and said they wanted to get into the food business because that was something people had to do each and every day. So at 17 years old, my father actually bought his first Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise, and so he's probably one of the top 2 oldest people still living that is also in the Kentucky Fried Chicken business. So he opened up a grocery store in Peoria, Illinois. They ended up in Peoria, Illinois. A lot of the Lebanese community ended up there because of Caterpillar. That's Caterpillar's world headquarters as well, and they had a lot of factory jobs. So they got into the grocery store business back then in 47, my grandfather did. And then 57, they built the new store and decided to really expand it into the meat business and pork and chicken because that was more the protein, the center of the plate. So he was born, we were always raised and taught as you get what you work for, not what you wish for. And so at a very young age, at 11 years old, I was actually in the meat plant standing on a milk crate to reach the cutting table, started cutting meat and getting my first paycheck at 11. My son, who was 12, has actually had a checking account since he was 7 and has 21 chickens in a 2-acre garden. So he's actually following in the same footpath as I did. So got out of college in 1990, came back to get in the family business. Started pursuing the same thing as my dad and my uncle. It became my dad and my uncle, myself and my cousin. So it was Alwan brothers and sons. The 2 older, my dad and my uncle, who were the owners, and then the 2 oldest boys. So we had 5 locations at the time, 4 retail, 1 retail and wholesale. 1996 came, the Jack in the Box scare came out, it killed somebody with E. coli, and there's a whole new segment of the food industry that now becomes a food safety issue. So the USDA decided they're going to change the guidelines and call something HACCP, Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points, which is going to become implemented in about 1998. So I told my father and my uncle, it's really time for you guys to step back and let Joe and I start to run the company. While you guys are still alive, you're going to be much more beneficial to us, helping us and guiding us. So we need to really start changing policies. Food safety, they've been doing it one way for years, and it worked for them. It really worked for them. I mean, the one main store, which is only 5,000 square feet, did $11 million a year retail. So they had a very successful retail business, and they were like, well, it's working, and we haven't killed anybody yet. And I'm like, well, when we do, we're done. So 2 years, they said they would retire. 2 years came and went. 1998, my uncle basically told me that he wasn't ready to retire and that they started the company, and sorry. So I said, it's not personal, it's business. I'm going to leave the family and go on my own. And so I actually walked away, took my share, and didn't ask for a nickel of my investment in the company. I walked away from the family, started something on my own. Back up a little bit, 1992, I had bought my first 150-acre farm. Everybody thought I was crazy at the time, and at the closing, it was an 87-year-old lady who I bought the farm from, but let her live there the rest of her life for free. That was the only way I could finance the farm. And she said to me at the closing, would you keep the farm name? And I said, what is the farm name? I didn't even know it had a name. She said, it's Echo Valley Farms, because you shoot a gun at echoes for 5 miles down the road. So I thought that was pretty unique. So in 1998, I'm out in Denver at the National Western Stock Show, showing cattle at the Super Bowl of cattle shows. And Steve Brooks at the time was the president of the American Angus Association, said to me, he says, well, you just need to call yourself Echo Valley Meats, because it's already fitting Echo Valley Farms and Echo Valley Meats, and it kind of gives you instant credibility. So my wife actually, for the Christmas present in '97, trademarked and created both logos for me while we were still dating. And so Echo Valley Meats and Echo Valley Farms was basically born back then, along with the trademarks. So my family thought I was completely nuts and crazy and lost my marbles, and there's no way I would succeed in a town, considering the store that I took was one of the smallest ones in Bartonville, which was only a town of 6,000, but 20 miles from the main facility. So of course, they told everybody that I would fall on my face and there's no way I could start a meat company from scratch and compete against the family business. So I decided to take it one step further and go under USDA federal inspection, which they were only state inspected, which means they could only sell in the state of Illinois, and obviously we're doing very well, but I wanted to go under federal inspection to sell nationally. So I went under USDA inspection. Ended up doing a big addition on the plant at the time, bet the farm, literally. Went for 1 year with a pregnant wife without taking a paycheck and thought I probably made the wrong decision. But I believed again, and you get what you work for, not what you wish for. I work 100 hours a week. I've missed 3 days in 24 years. So I continue to do that to this day. So after I got under USDA inspection and I did this addition, I decided I wanted to be one of the best sausage and ham makers in the country. We started processing deer. Something else my father and my uncle thought I lost my marbles for. Who's going to bring a deer in for us to process? Well, now we process anywhere from 12 to 1,400 of them in 60 to 90 days and several 100,000 pounds of sausage, and you charge them for their own meat back. So it's really a pretty good deal is what it amounted to. So went to Europe to do an apprenticeship in Germany and Denmark, which was actually about a 3-year apprenticeship that I actually did in about 4 to 6 months. I was able to test out of everything because I was so knowledgeable in the industry already. And came back to this country, entered my product in its first competition in 2001, and our very first competition, we took grand champion of our summer sausage. So next thing I know, our phones are ringing from Swiss Colony, from Hickory Farms, people like that wanting to know if we can make sausage for them. So I said, sure. So went to Monroe, Wisconsin, landed a job with Swiss Colony. They said, do you want to make 150,000 units or 500,000 units? And I said, let's start small. So I took the job with 150,000 units. I'm selling to them for $2 a piece, watching them sell them for $15 a piece, thinking I am making them a whole lot of money and they're not touching this product. So a year or two later, 2003, I decided to get into the mail order business myself and start pursuing it, selling that same item for $6 and $7, which was now jumped my margins significantly, but quite a bit cheaper than the industry average. So fast forward a few more years. Mail orders going well, we get into catering, really building the brand on a level. Obviously, a lot of hurdles along the way. It's not all gravy. Come to find out that job with Swiss Colony that I made them probably $2 million, I lost a nickel a piece on all those sausages that I just made them. So I realized that I just lost $7,500 in a hurry to go broke because I was anxious to do business with the big guys. So I learned real quick that bigger was not always better. Efficiency is much more important. So 2012, we're going to fast forward. I've been telling my wife the show comes out called Shark Tank. I'm an audition for this show called Shark Tank. We come home from a soccer tournament from my son. I'm watching Shark Tank on a Sunday night on a rerun. I tell her, I need to jump on the computer. I've been telling you for 2 years I want to go out for the show. I want to see when auditions were. So watching, I get on the internet, and I said, you're not going to believe this. We're in Chicago all weekend. Auditions for the show were in Chicago. And she says, well, maybe some other day. And I says, well, that's the bad news. The good news is there's one left in LA on Saturday, and I'm jumping on a plane Friday. And so I decided to jump on a plane. I flew to LA. I got to the hotel. There was already 5,000 people in line. Stood in line for 17 hours to audition. It's a rigorous process to get through the show. I ended up making the show. So the night we aired, which was April 6th of 2012, I had a party, and I think all 300 people in the room assumed I got a deal, or why would he ever have a party? I did not get a deal on the show, but in theory, I really did get the deal. So we aired, all 5 of them said we have phenomenal product, loved our product, but I didn't have quite a good enough business plan for them at the time. So I have my IT guy, he says, Matthew, how many were on our website 30 minutes ago? And he clicks it up and he says 4. I said, how many are on our website actively right now? He said 87,000. We're at 6,800 open shopping baskets. We put about $1 million in the bank in the first 2.5 weeks. So even though we didn't get the deal, I truly feel we got the deal. So that's 2 years ago. Opportunities just keep coming day after day. Whether it's NASCAR, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, lots of different companies around the country. I'm going to continue to stay small, control my own products, catering, mail order, and we have a small retail store in Bartonville, the town of 6,000. And I don't want to just let my brand go. I want to control my own brand and control my own mail order industry because I see the future. More and more people are wanting to get into the natural, organic beef, the grass-fed stuff. That's a new line we recently have. Bill Curtis from Chicago was a famous WGN anchor. He's also the voice in American justice, Anchorman, the Budweiser commercials. Bill has 10,000 acres in Kansas. We are now doing his full distribution for tall grass beef. So now we are becoming a fulfillment center as well for many other brands and several other companies that were on Shark Tank as well. So I just want to continue to build our brand, Echo Valley Meats, on a very slow process, but controlled and managed properly. We have very little debt. I believe as you pay as you go and you don't owe, so I'm fortunate. I will wait till I have the money in the bank to buy the next piece of equipment rather than borrowing and figuring out how I'm going to make those payments. I'm kind of old school, but I've learned the hard way. And so as I said in the beginning, bigger is not always better, and I'm going to plan on the same growth and just slow, moderate, controlled as I go.
Thanks, Dave. Jordan, I want to ask you a similar question in terms of going from the inception of an idea to a startup and then going on a growth path. What were some of the assumptions you had in the beginning that you found out were not true, and what did you do to adapt?
Sure. So the way that we had the idea, so my husband and co-founder was an entrepreneur before Zubeen with another business, and I had watched that go from inception to exit. And I was a little jealous. I had helped him write that business plan when I was in business school, and then said, I'm scared to do this, you do this, not a good idea to be newlyweds, right? And I wanted to do that for myself. So when we came up with Zubeen, what we did and the way that we sort of conceived of that idea was that we had many ideas, and we were constantly testing. We knew we wanted to start a different business, right? So we probably have 500 different ideas that are on the cutting room floor. And we would come up with them. There's so many tools out there that are free that you can go and just do very simple market testing. It's not expensive, right? So we would do surveys and it's not, not great, not good. If you look up Toyager, that was one. I mean, we have lots of domain names. And so Zubeen, it was really personal experience, right? Both educators, lived here and then around the country, working in different capacities as teachers and many other roles. But when we had kids, I now have 2 kids who are 2.5 and almost 5. And it was when we had children that we started experiencing that despite the fact that we were both educators, it was very, very difficult to know what was going to work for our kids. It's the internet is wonderful. I used to work at Google, so I believe in free access to information and getting everything you need right there, instant access. But at the same time, it's completely overwhelming. And especially as a parent, you can look one thing up and 20 different perspectives are going to come to you. And so I thought, well, I really wish that there was a way. We are in a biracial marriage and relationship, and we wanted at that particular time, a family that looked multiracial. My daughter was about to be born. I wanted to find a book that would work for my kid. And we went to the library, we went everywhere, and we just couldn't find the thing that we were looking for. So we said, well, there seems like there's something here, and started doing testing, and really grew it little by little. We paid. I stayed working. We did similar. Did not take on a bunch of debt. We both kept our jobs, and one and then the other rolled off when we eventually had the ability to do that. So we started building. First, we built with an external team. We, hired an agency, which was hard because it's far more expensive, to pay somebody else than to have it in-house. But we had to do that, so we paid for them to build our technology and started conceiving of it and spending all of our nights and extra hours doing it, and just really did that on top of a very full-time job and the double job of also being parents, and just didn't sleep a lot for that period of time, or now, or ever again. Okay. That'll be another topic for one. But anyway, so we sort of went through this for about a year, building, seeing how things would go, beta testing, doing things very, very, very slowly and bootstrapping it ourselves. And we had been speaking to an institutional investor about, they're called Kapor Capital, they're in Silicon Valley, and we'd sort of had a warm connection to them from the past, but they had said no to Felix's first business. But we went and pitched an idea to them way back when, and they said, well, this seems like a great idea. It seems like something we would fund. They are very interested in social enterprises as well. But we're going to need to see a product. Not okay to just come to us with an idea. And I think the days of having an idea and raising money on an idea they're gone for right now, unless you've had a great idea and seen that to exit in the past and you have that track record, right? So we built it. That's why we spent all that time building, and then we flew back out lied and said we had, a meeting in California anyway, and, went and met with them and pitched, and then heard back from them. They said, okay, we'll invest, some seed money, and then we invested our own money, found some friends and family, and were able to then, I was able then to leave my position and to really get started in full on the business. But honestly, we launched when I was still working full time at Google, so it wasn't really until a couple months later, and we were on Shark Tank like 1 week after I left my full-time job. So in that case, it was unexpected that we got to be on the show. So it worked out, extremely well for us. But we actually filmed it very, very far before it showed. So we just kept building our business, and it's been sort of a slow roll to where we are. Shark Tank definitely catapulted us into like this other, area in terms of our consumer business. But we also started developing our B2B business, and that's really because we listened to our customers who said, "We love your service. I don't always want to get a book in my house, so I go to the library." And we have all these children's librarians on our staffs who are like, "This is really cool. Wish we had this this service working for our library." So listen to our customers, and we, on very little notice, went to the big librarians conference in Las Vegas, of all places, and we went and we made a brochure and didn't have a product and just tried to talk to people about it, and they said, "Yeah, seems interesting." And we met our first customer there, and then we now have a business there. But we really sort of sold that a little bit more in a vision, but it was very helpful to have this existing business first.
Great, thanks, Jordan. Becky, the next question is for you. We've heard a bit about some of these common opportunity recognition experiences and challenges and hurdles that entrepreneurs have to overcome. In your experience, what do you think makes rural entrepreneurship special, both on the opportunity side and on the challenges side? You've obviously been a serial entrepreneur, are a serial entrepreneur in a how large is your town again?
I live in a town of 30 people.
Okay, so that qualifies as rural.
Anybody from a smaller town? Just checking? No. Okay.
So I'm really curious to hear what you think, having thought a lot about this, are, again, not just the unique challenges, but the unique opportunities as well.
Rural is definitely very different. I want to specify that the liquor store is in the 8 miles away town that has about 6,000 people. People picture the liquor store in that town of 30 people, and it's in the big city. That's what we say. It's in the big city of Alva, Oklahoma, which is a town of about 6,000 people. There are a lot of challenges that are different, especially when you live in a rural area. The first one is you don't run into the same type of network. You don't run and jump on a plane to Los Angeles because you're 3 hours from the airport. There's a lot of different factors about it. If you're focusing only on your local market, then your local market is limited to who you are around. But increasingly, where's my rural broadband people? Yeah, we have the opportunity to connect to the entire world. I live in a town of 30 people. I have a DSL line that comes straight to my house, and I'm able to do all the things I do because I have that DSL. And that's provided by the telephone cooperative that my grandmother was a phone operator for. So that's the way rural works. Connections last for generations. There are challenges in opportunity recognition. Specifically, you asked about a lot more of the rural entrepreneurs that I see are responding to a local issue. There is a perceived lack in their community. There's something that they know that their town doesn't have that they wish it did. Or they have a dream, an idea that they've come up with, something that they've cherished, like the idea of making a bookstore and coffee shop in a small town of under 1,000 people, which we talked about earlier. A person that I met just here at this conference is thinking about starting a bookstore. Nobody's come to her and said, we really need a bookstore. But that's her dream and that's her opportunity. And some of the things that are bigger and better from being from a rural area is that it's easy to find people who will be excited and support you. The supportive network that exists in a small town. If you are based in a big city and you are trying to compete for attention from the economic developers, good luck. And, you may get on Shark Tank and get a lot of attention that way, but in a small town, you have the opportunity to really connect with individuals and people who care about your project. Fred Carl Jr. started a business. He was a builder, and he was based in Greenwood, Mississippi, and he had this crazy idea of building a special stove that people could have in their house. And so he spent weekends and evenings working on this stove project. Well, people would stop him on the street and say, "How's your stove project going? Is that coming along?" That kind of support. He credited later in an interview that that was the support that enabled him to build the Viking Range Corporation in Greenwood, Mississippi. And that was the reason he didn't relocate to Jackson or Dallas or any of the other large metropolitan areas that later came to try to lure him away. He stayed with Greenwood because the people were his connection. So I think that that opportunity to have a supportive network and people that can notice you is much bigger in a rural area than it is in most urban areas.
Fantastic. Thanks, Becky. Jeff, you know, everyone has already talked about access to capital and probably will continue to throughout the day. So from a lender's perspective, where does PNC see opportunities in rural areas right now? How do you vet those opportunities? And how do you see the financing landscape changing going forward?
Okay. Well, first let me say I'm really happy that Becky clarified, because a town of 30 people that could support a liquor store, I had visions of some serious alcoholism issues. It's kind of it's an interesting time in the banking community, in the banking world. There is significant uncertainty. I think for this audience particularly, if I think about banking in my hometown, it was a hometown affair. The bank was the Bank of Rich Square, and everybody knew the president and the lending officers, and the lending officers and president knew everybody. Well, the Bank of Rich Square no longer exists. It became a Planters Bank, and then it became a Centura Bank, and now it's a PNC Bank. But what it means is that the person sitting in the chair is a manager, not the president. That the local connections that once were a part of the application, that were a part of what you sold, simply no longer exist, because the decision to lend is not being made in that branch any longer. The decision to lend is now, like so many things in corporate America, has been elevated beyond the scale and scope of people knowing each other and that having any meaning in the process. So, how does PNC look at opportunities? It kind of looks at opportunities uniformly. There's very little difference in how you look at a small business loan and how you look at a major corporate loan. It's the same kind of credit criteria, which is good news and bad news. We're also in a period where the regulatory environment has changed dramatically. And some of the regulations coming out of the financial crisis will likely make it more difficult for smaller businesses and for entrepreneurs to borrow, because one of the significant requirements is banks are having to reserve more capital against loans, and having to reserve more capital against loans kind of means you're either going to raise a lot more capital or you're going to make fewer loans. So I suspect we're going to see fewer loans made, which means the competition for loans will get greater. And I think it will, in all honesty, be more difficult to do. We're also going to see fewer branches. We're in an environment right now. How many of you guys bank online? Boo to you. Okay.
What if we bank online with our local bank?
Okay. Well, whether you bank online or however you bank online, what banks are finding right now, what banks are facing right now is people are increasingly not showing up in the branches. And the branches are expensive to own and operate. It takes about $3 million to open a branch on average. Okay, so the question is, how many branches do I need when people aren't coming into the branches? The problem is, if I ask you all to raise your hand and ask how comfortable would you be if you didn't have a branch nearby, almost all of you would say, I want a branch, I just don't want to go in it. Okay, so what banks are struggling with right now is, how do we support the cost of branches that people are increasingly not using? I think in rural communities, it will be even more difficult when there's no branch. Banking online is It's simply the growing trend. So I think what we're going to see to get to the answer quickly, I think we're going to see in the new environment is more competition for loans, probably more requirements as to loans, less individual contact, and fewer branches, which I think in rural communities particularly will not be a good thing.
Okay. Well, Mark, let's go to you next because you're representing a very different model of access to capital, one that is still an experiment. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit more about where your company fits into this innovative financing landscape and what trends you see that may be particularly relevant for rural entrepreneurs?
Yeah. Entrepreneurs are all trying to solve a problem, right? And the fundamental problem that we're trying to solve was actually articulated very well by Jeffrey. To go into a bank right now and get a small business loan below 100K, which is the space that we focus on, is nearly impossible because it costs the banks the same to underwrite a 50K loan as a $2 million loan, and so they'll just do those larger loans. At the same time, you have a confluence of a couple of different cultural trends. You have people becoming increasingly comfortable with doing banking transactions online. You have social media, which allows a message to spread very, very quickly online. And then you have this regulatory burden that is at once making it more difficult for banks to lend below 100K, and in other ways, thanks to the Jobs Act and others, opening up capital using the internet. And so I do not consider myself a crowdfunder, and I can explain sort of how StreetShares fits in. But crowdfunding is, in essence, the electronic passing of the cup, right? It's been around. It takes place in every church on Sunday morning. The Statue of Liberty was actually completed using a crowdfunding technique. So this idea of kind of electronically passing the cup is fairly simple, right? The problem is you have securities laws that are intended to protect investors, and rightly so, because we have a history of sort of excesses in this country. And so we need regulation to protect investors. And then you have new technologies that allow for the raising of capital in very, very efficient, innovative ways. And the conflict between those two spaces is where crowdfunding is trying to figure out exactly where the path forward is. Traditional crowdfunding, first of all, I don't like the term crowdfunding at all, because the single term is used to describe two very, very different activities. One is rewards or donation-based crowdfunding. This is Kickstarter, this is Indiegogo, enormously popular, but it is in essence a charitable donation, right? It is somebody who has a project and they want to fund that project, and so you give them a donation. In exchange for that, you might get some token of appreciation, a T-shirt, a concert ticket, something like that. Primarily, it is donation-based. At best, it's the pre-sale of product. That is, you have some product, you're making some widget, and you go on to Kickstarter or Indiegogo, and you pre-sale that product using a crowdfunding method. That is very, very simple. The regulatory burden for that is quite low. The other side of it, which is very complicated, is investment-based crowdfunding. So this is where a business raises capital online using crowdfunding. In exchange for that, there's some kind of security that goes from the business to those investors, debt or equity. And this gets very, very difficult, and this is where the Jobs Act comes into place. As the SEC wrote the rules to implement the Jobs Act, they wrote them in a fairly restrictive way. And so, in my view, equity-based crowdfunding is very, very difficult to do right now. And that is primarily because of the regulatory burdens placed on the small business that are trying to raise that capital. And so what StreetShares has done is we have placed ourselves in the middle of that transaction. And so first, we only deal with debt. We do not do any kind of equity in these startups. We do small commercial loans. But we place ourselves in the center of this transaction. So on the front end, I'm a small business lender, lending in 39 states and licensed to do so. On the back end, between me and the investors, I issue these securities that are regulated by the SEC. And by voluntarily placing ourselves in the middle and raising our hand and saying both state regulators and the SEC, you can regulate us, we then take some of the pressure off of the business trying to raise the capital. So StreetShares is a very different model. Crowdfunding traditionally is a dating site, and the site just kind of matches up borrowers and investors, or borrowers and lenders, and then sort of backs up and lets them go on the date, and whatever happens, happens, right? We stand in the middle, we issue the loan under our license, we service the loan, and then we distribute payments to investors behind us who have backed that loan. So it's a subtle variant of crowdfunding, but I think an important one.
And can you give us more of a sense of who's on either side of that transaction so far and where you expect things to go?
Yeah. So we are, we're new. I'm a recovering lawyer. Was at a big law firm here on K Street. Saw the idea for this and left last year to co-found StreetShares. My two co-founders, you need 3 sets of talent to do this, right? You need a regulatory guy, you need a banking lending expert, and you need a software programmer who can build the platform. So those are the 3 co-founders that we have. Our focus is on small businesses, and the model here is affinity-based. So investors come in and they bid to compete to back a loan to a business. And they set both how much of that loan they want to back, and they set their required rate of return. That is, I will lend, you need a $50,000 loan, I will back $5,000 of that, but only if the rate is 12% or 14 or whatever it is. And then we run that auction, and all the lowest bids are consolidated. So on the investor side, we have a combination of individual retail investors, and we have various funds and institutional capital that all compete to lend to that person. And then on the borrower side, we have small businesses taking out loans below 100K.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I just want to add something. I don't want to give the impression that that banks are completely out of the lending business, because we're not. And I think it may be an overstatement to say that we're only do large loans. I think, though, from the entrepreneur perspective, both what Jordan and Dave are doing would put them in a position, if they ever needed to borrow money, to be more likely to get it. In Dave's case, he's got hard assets now. The equipment that he buys and has not financed represents hard assets, which would be attractive as security on a loan. In Trudy's case, while she may not have hard assets, she's got a track record, a customer base, execution of a business plan. Those kind of things still carry weight. I think the most difficult space, obviously, is I've got an idea and I'm going to, and I need some money to do it. I think banks are unlikely to be a good place for that kind of lending. I think they are now, and I think they're going to be less likely going forward.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious what folks on the panel should just jump in if you have insight on this question. This is anecdotal. I'm not asking for something super data driven, but in your experience as an entrepreneur in a rural area, or just knowing a lot of fellow travelers in rural areas trying to start companies, which sources of capital do you think are most effective right now? Is it banks? Is it credit cards? Is it home equity loans? Is it friends and family? Is it crowdfunding? Is it changing? Where do you think most rural entrepreneurs are going to just get started?
So most used.
Mm-hmm.
Most used. What I hear from people who are starting businesses in small towns is that they are going to their own savings, primarily. There's some friends and family still going on everywhere. Credit cards are incredibly common. In the startup phase, those are the big 3, I think. In small towns, and not all the small town bank branches are dead yet. While the picture is not good for most small town branches, there are still, in my town of 30 people, there is an independent bank. Hopeton State Bank, they're online, hopetonbank.com. And there are local banks. There's wonderful bankers. Jill Castilla in Edmond, Oklahoma is with Citizen State Bank, and they are a wonderful community-oriented bank. And she said that that is her competitive advantage because that's the way she gets people to drive past 20 other banking institutions to bank with her, is because she gets involved in community businesses and sees it as her job to get to yes. She may tell you no now, but she's going to work with you for 2 years until your credit is repaired and your business is in place and you've got your idea lined out, and then she can say yes. That's the kind of community banking that continues to thrive in small towns. Existing businesses get offers for funding all the time. My own business, I can't tell you how many, hey, we'd like to finance you through your credit card receipts. I get those offers all the time, and so once you're an existing bricks and mortar kind of business, you turn away offers of not right capital that aren't a good fit for your business. But I still primarily see people that either do it out of their own savings. We also see a lot of relending funds, small loans that are made through RC&D, the Resource Conservation and Development Groups, utility cooperatives, those kind of folks that make the $50,000 equipment loan to the local business, and sometimes to startups. It just depends on everybody's little relending fund operates on different rules. And so we see little pockets of different innovations in regional solutions that people access. And then there's still a lot of, well, I bought the business from my family and they toted the note. And that kind of sweetheart deal that can only happen in a small town, I think. I could be wrong. People may do that in big cities too.
Right. Other thoughts on this question?
I can't speak to what is happening. I mean, I certainly see in the general sort of like tech community that crowdfunding has become, I don't know what I should call the Kickstarter side of things has become really huge. But I've also seen it sort of have a negative impact on some. Like, so if you're not able to raise and it can be a real challenge. But for those who are able to achieve their goal, they're basically, raising money without giving away any equity. I mean, that would be unbelievable if you can do it. I mean, I look at Reading Rainbow got tons of press, for example. They raised like $4 or $5 million, and they're a company, but they didn't give away any equity for that. I probably going to be getting like my signed book from LeVar Burton, but that's pretty amazing. But those are obviously, it's not, rural community, so I can't speak to that.
Right.
In Peoria, I've seen a lot of friends and family. Peoria is still a smaller community, so there's a national chain I know that someone owns, and I know he's built 6 or 7 of them, and he gets a lot of community members involved, but again gives up no equity. So how he's always managed that, I was always curious. But each restaurant seems to be successful, where he's paying his investors back on a timely and a good dividend back. So it seems to work for him, but he's also in these restaurants managing it himself and truly understands it, rather than opening them and giving it to somebody else to manage. So he really has a handle on it. So I think in that situation it tends to work. But I've seemed to see more and more people that can't get traditional financing go to family and friends lately to start small companies.
Right.
And if I could have the luxury of jumping back in.
Sure.
I'm hearing a lot of interest from communities in community ownership and cooperative ownership. And people come to me all the time with questions about community ownership of, can we start our own grocery store? Can we start our own clothing store? And let the community own it, because we can't find one person who will finance the whole thing. And I think that that's extremely promising in rural communities, and I see a lot of people doing it.
That's really interesting. I mean, it sounds like folks are articulating, on the one hand, there's this friends and family, community-based model that's been around since time immemorial, that's based on actual relationships with people and that is very much rooted in a place. And then at the other extreme, you have Kickstarter, where you're never going to meet LeVar Burton, but you're glad he gave you the book, and you're willing to kind of chip in
At the White House Science Festival,
well,
for science
awesome.
fair, since that's related to your work. But yes, right, I get your point.
Yeah, no, it was awesome having him there.
Yeah.
But in any event, it's more of an anonymous transaction. I'm interested in this idea. I could be anywhere in the country, and I want to put in my $10 or $100. This is maybe a question for Mark.
I was
Go
just going
ahead.
to say, friends and family is still, in any community, rural, or certainly, in our case too, but I think the bigger issue that the administrator was speaking to before is just access. In a rural community, that is a benefit. People, you had
Right.
this, personal relationship, so your friends and family circle might not be as well resourced or what have you, but they're there, right? And they know you and they know the idea, whereas in other communities, it's just about there's tons of people who don't have friends and family who are going to want to invest. And if they do, they're taking equity. It's different, you know.
Right. So Mark mentioned this concept of affinity, right? So there's affinity among people who know each other well and trust each other, or don't, as the case may be, and can make investment decisions based on that. Then there's affinity based on strangers who have some, vision in common, or relying on success factors. So do you see these different forms of affinity converging, either on your platform or in general, or do you think they're going to stay separate going forward? I mean, do you think that do you think that we're entering a world where I know Becky really well, I'm going to bet on Becky, and then I can bring along a bunch of strangers who don't know her as well because they trust me for some other reason?
Yeah. 80 years ago, you could walk into a community bank. You can still, but there's just fewer of them, right? We love community banks. There's just fewer of them. 80 years ago, you could walk into one of these banks and you were granted a loan in part based on the numbers, right? And in part based on who you were, especially in small towns, right? Because they know who you are, they knew your parents, they coach your softball team, whatever it was, right? So there was this subjective, very human sort of component to this. It's a bit like going in for a job interview, right? The numbers are kind of the screen to get past the, HR desk. Once you're in the room with that hiring manager, it's the whole person concept, right? It's who you are. Years ago, who you were, the totality of who you were, was part of the lending experience, right? It is not anymore. And so the reason why affinities are so important to our model is that we think affinities substitute in some way for that. That is, there's a trust in, if I'm bidding to back your loan, there's a trust in you that might come from some shared affinity. So our primary and our largest affinity group are veteran-owned small businesses because that's who we are. And we think veterans will be willing to back loans to other veterans because there's that element of trust there. The administrator this morning talked about subjectivity in lending and trying to bring that back a little bit, right? We now do that because you can invest in people who are like you. And so I think the two will actually converge. I think using the internet and the ease of communication, you can now, as an investor at least, you can find borrowers who are like you, with whom you have some affinity. And that element of trust is actually very important. And I think if you're a borrower, you can find investors who will back loans to a business owned by someone like you. So I think we'll see a convergence.
Great. Now we've got some more time. I want to open it up to the whole room. You've heard everyone's stories, at least in brief. We've had some discussion of access to capital, other opportunities and challenges for entrepreneurs writ large, for rural entrepreneurs in particular. What questions are on your mind? You can ask them for the whole panel, or you could direct them to individual panelists. Just raise your hand, I'll call on you, and we can go from there. Yes?
May I ask a question of you?
Sure.
Is this on? The capital issue is a very important one. And I think you've heard discussion about friends and family and savings. Well, one of the biggest savings pools in the country is the IRA accounts that we all have. And I was hoping to speak with the administrator because I'd mentioned this issue to her this summer at the Rural Investment Summit. I have a self-directed IRA. I'm allowed to invest in any company, as risky a deal as I want. I can squander my entire retirement, but I'm not allowed to invest in my own company. So I'm asking you as a member of the administration, would you work with me and others to look into this matter? Because if only 10% of the IRA funding is allowed to be invested in the most productive small business people, the most productive job creators, small businesses, we're talking about somewhere in the range of maybe $50 to $55 billion that could be unleashed with no cost to the federal government and would allow me to, and I believe that we should cooperate with agencies like the SBA to have them and their counseling function and others review our business plan before we're actually allowed to make the investment. And then lastly, as someone who seeks to invest in rural America, particularly in high poverty areas, this is an impact investment. So if you wrap all this together, I think there's a great opportunity to unleash capital Don't force it all to go to Wall Street. Send some to Main Street, where in rural communities where it's really needed. I'd like to get your reaction to that.
Sure. Now, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's an idea that I've certainly been following. My colleagues have been following for a while now. There's interesting equities to take into consideration on the part of not just access to capital on the one hand, but investor protection on the other. I think it's a really fruitful area for exploration, and I look forward to following up with you after the panel, and we can talk a little bit more. And what's your name, and who are you with again?
Joe James, and I'm one of the competitors.
Ah, great. All right. And for others who have questions, just introduce yourself before you ask a question. I'd love to know who you are and where you're from. Anyone else?
Hey, I'm Travis Starkey. So this is a question about historic wealth gaps in the South. Knowing that a lot of entrepreneurs do have to go to friends and family, like that's the primary well they go to for their funding, doing a lot of bootstrapping in those communities. How do we address these huge historic wealth gaps that exist primarily between blacks and whites in the South and step in to provide more capital in creative ways?
Wealth gaps, did I hear correctly? I'm sorry, I was having trouble understanding.
I mean, it goes back to, I can't recall the figures off the top of my head, but if you look at nationally and also regionally, white families tend to have more capital available, whether it's through like retirement funds, just savings, what have you. I think it's by a rate of about 50 grand on average. And it could be in an asset like a home that they own or something like that, but that gap is substantial. So when someone goes to open a home equity line, there's a disproportionate number of people by race that actually have access to that specific line of credit. And I'm curious what y'all think about that, because I'm not sure what to do about it.
How do you solve that problem? That's a big problem, and I don't know that I can wave the magic wand and solve it. I see, I'm thinking of people that I know and communities that I know that are addressing this. Does somebody dying to jump in here as I think along here out loud?
Let's address the geographic component here, right? When it comes to venture capital, at least, 80% of the VC money comes from 9 cities, most of it from 3, San Francisco, New York, and Boston, right? As we raise money for our own company, I can tell you, I've been circling back and forth on planes between, San Francisco and New York and here, right? Part of it is simply geographic, right? VCs also tend to, about half or so, tend to only invest sort of regionally or locally, right? There's a greater tendency for VC to invest in a company that is near them, right? They know the founders, they can go and stop in, and so forth. So, you brought up sort of the racial issue. I would frame it primarily in geographic terms, and of course there's a relationship between those two. And I think the solution is, in both cases, is allowing for greater transparency and communication between people so they can invest in each other across, geographic, across racial lines, right? And so the more folks can communicate, the more transparent platforms are, the more that you have a chance to, invest in and back loans to people that you believe in. I think that can go a long way toward solving some of these problems.
I have a suggestion. I thought long enough. Thank you very much for giving me time to think. Okay. Your question is about the friends and family level of investing as opposed to the VC level of investing. At the friends and family level of investing, the small businesses that you're thinking about happening in rural communities where there is a major wealth gap between classes of people of color and people in the social economic background and all the other differences that hold people apart by class and by race in rural areas. I think the best solution I can think of off the top of my head is around the community foundation model. There is a huge transfer of wealth that's happening generationally in rural communities. As people retire, people die, and leave their assets then to their children who do not live in the same community they live in. Even if they live in a small community, they're living somewhere else. This is an opportunity to capture a portion of that transfer of wealth into a community foundation. The Center for Rural Affairs is doing huge work on this, and a number of other groups as well, focusing on rural communities and capturing this enormous generational transfer of wealth. If you take that concept and you connect it with the concept of entrepreneurial lending, I think that you have a potential solution that can, as long as the concept of entrepreneurial lending is open and non-biased and focused on bridging those gaps, I think that you have a potential solution, and it would be something you could work on right now and actually affect the future of entrepreneurship in a community that would be greater than it was before you started.
Travis, that's a really good question. I think I may be the only Southerner on the panel here, and you know, historical problems take long periods to solve, and I think the hole in Becky's analysis, and I don't disagree, but the hole in it is that historically in communities like mine, like Rich Square, we weren't owners. We as African American people, we're not owners. And so, you know, where do you start? My grandfather's a sharecropper, and probably more than half, you know, I'm old enough to have grown up in the segregated South, and more than half of my classmates in the black high school were, their folks were sharecroppers. Sharecroppers don't own anything. Buying houses was extremely difficult in that environment, the community bank not being representative of the whole community. So we've got generational issues. Now my cousins who are still there have gotten jobs in the best employer in town or near town is the local prison farm. And many of them who are, you know, are prison guards during the day, during the evening, are farmers during the day. They're beginning to own their farms. I own a farm with my cousin. We bought the family farm. And so they now have an asset base that will, you know, that will pass on. That's the generational nature of things. And I'm not sure there's a way to jumpstart that. I wish there were, to accelerate that. The only acceleration is for, you know, better lending and more access to capital would accelerate the process. But as we're talking up here, that's going to be a difficult process. This is going to be a slow fix, slower than I want or you want. But I don't think there are any instant answers to it. We've only been at this process of equalization for about 40 years now. It's going to take a bit longer than this. That's the bad news. The good news is there is reason to be hopeful as I look at my community where African Americans now own the filling station, or service station, as you guys up north say. So, you know, and now own the hardware store, you know, in my hometown. So, you know, there is a process. I think that process is underway. I think we've not gotten to the point where we will greatly benefit from the kind of thing that Becky's talking about, but I think we're getting there.
Thank you. Yes, right here.
Yes, my name is Ray Daffner, and this is not quite a question, but perhaps a response to the gentleman's question there. You know, a strategy that we've seen be very effective, I think a lot of people in the room have seen been effective, is building development finance institutions in the communities in which these challenges occur. So, for example, in the South, you have a wonderful CDFI, Community Development Finance Institution called HOPE, or Alternative Hope out of Mississippi that serves the Mississippi Delta. This is something important for the area that I work in too, which is rural Appalachia, because that low wealth challenge that you described is also present in the Appalachian region as well. So building these local institutions that are not banks, they're regulated in a sense by Treasury, be they providers of debt or providers of equity, like my colleague here, Kerwin Tesdell, can talk quite a bit about that, is one way to address that kind of wealth gap that you've described.
Sure, go ahead.
I have a question. My name is Maz Movet. I own a fitness company in the area. And my question is directed towards, I think a lot of the problems that small business owners have is the ability to be able to have capital to get going with something, right? You said it yourself, the PNC guy. The difficulty of being able to start a business with an idea. Now, I think as all small business owners, if you have a really smart CPA, you usually look for a way to not pay as much taxes as you need to. Okay, I'm not trying to throw myself under a bus right now, but I think if you're
Within the bounds of the law.
within the bounds of the law, of course, yes. But one of the most frustrating things that I've dealt with, and I'm just trying to ask, is it like a regulation that's kicked in since the Obama administration has taken over? Because I literally remember in 2006 walking into SunTrust, and they were giving out business lines of credit left and right. They gave me $100,000 without looking at anything. And they were offering that to everyone. It was like, well, okay, great, I'll take it. And it was fantastic. And now, my business has grown dramatically I'd say since 2006. We have, 30 employees, and each one makes anywhere from $70,000 to $100,000. And, we make a lot of revenue. And we make people healthy, which is an important thing for our society, right? So I have the ability to do a lot more stuff in terms of, we were going to open up a gym last year, but we held back on doing it because capital was an issue. I have another program that I can implement that would double our employees, but capital is an issue again, right? And we would be able to drive so much revenue. But is it, I guess I would address this to our PNC. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. I apologize. Jeff. Is it the regulations that have been put in place since the Obama administration for probably just cause because of what Wall Street did or whatever? I hope I didn't offend anybody. Are those the regulations that are keeping small businesses from doing? I mean, I could literally double my revenue and employees and create high-paying jobs, but I can't do it because of the capital that every time I go, they say, like this year I bought a house. Why do you think I got approved for an increase in my line of credit? Because I made sure everything looked good on my tax return. Previous years, my cash flow was amazing. But because of why, I had a smart CPA. I look for every loophole that the law allows me to do. I'm not breaking any laws. But that being said, I wouldn't qualify for anything. So I guess my question would be, is it because of those regulations that you guys can't give us anything? I've been turned down so many times. It's so demoralizing.
It's like, I think most complex questions, there's not a simple answer. The first answer, though, and thank you very much for naming a competitive bank as the one who was just handing out money. But the first is, what banks were doing prior to the crash were really bad ideas. It was bad business. This was not a good thing. I think all of American, corporate America tends to be, we have to relearn the lessons about every generation or so. And I was around for the savings and loan crisis, which wasn't a whole lot different than this crisis. We just, we got crazy and we had to relearn those lessons. So I think better business practices are a part of it, and rightly so. But regulation is a huge part of it. And some of the regulation intended to, it's the unintended consequence of some of the regulations is that banks simply have to be more, not just, prudent, have to be a lot more prudent with lending. It's the regulatory environment, but it's also the business environment. Many of those loans didn't get paid back, and banks failed because many of those loans didn't get paid back. They were loans that never should have been made. They had inappropriate security. Many of them were, the banks weren't doing appropriate due diligence. It's taking longer to get loans, too, you may have noticed, because banks are back to doing the kinds of due diligence that banks used to do. During the lending spree, nobody was doing very much in the way of due diligence. But the biggest piece of it, the regulatory environment is going to require that banks be A, more prudent, and B, the fact that we have to collateralize, which means simply that we've got to use funds that we could otherwise use for additional lending to collateralize some of the transactions that we're currently doing. So there's simply less money available. And that will continue to be the case unless we see regulatory changes.
I wanted to ask you. No, go ahead.
You said a lot.
Yeah.
And I appreciate all that. So you basically, it's the regulations. It's the regulations that are
Fundamentally,
limiting us,
yes.
right?
Fundamentally, yes.
Thank you, Obama.
Wanted to tie that issue into the rural access to capital problem. So the primary regulation that we have it named as Dodd-Frank, right? But that's the primary driver behind this. And the challenge is that affects the large national banks and the small local community banks almost in the same way, right? And so the large banks have the ability to hire all these lawyers and handle it, right? The smaller banks are simply laying off loan officers to hire more lawyers, right? So I think there's a very important linkage between the regulatory issues, and again, regulation is needed. It's very important to have, right? But there's a linkage between that and then disproportionately affecting those smaller banks that rural communities rely on.
Well, this was a huge regulatory move, and in all huge regulatory moves, the pendulum has swung more to the conservative side than it probably ought to be. It will right itself over time. It's in everybody's interest that good loans get made. It's in everybody's interest that money move through the system, that capital is available. And right now, both the banks are being cautious and the regulators are being cautious. We will all start to move back toward the center over time, if history is an indicator.
There's someone in the audience that I wanted to call. Is Sarah Tyree in the audience? Yes. From what I've read about what CoBank is doing, it seems relevant to this conversation. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about what your rural investment fund is doing.
Well, I'd like to point out a couple of initiatives that we have kicked off in the last year that fit into some of the issues that have been raised. One is the acknowledgement that when you're looking for equity, that if you're not in a larger city, it's very hard to tap into it. And you have a lot of rural industry all across the United States. And when they're looking to expand their business, where do they go to get equity to build that extra line or to expand their operation? And so the Farm Credit System, about 8 of the members of the Farm Credit were a cooperative. And we put funding into a new Rural Business Investment Corporation. And this is going to provide equity for small businesses out in rural America. They have to be, agribusiness that fits into the criteria of what Farm Credit can lend to, but it's a new opportunity to tap into equity in rural America. The Rural Infrastructure Fund that was announced this past summer is another opportunity for providing financing from Wall Street to be tapped into rural. Right now, as you're mentioning with your startup company, a lot of folks on Wall Street, they don't have the time or patience to go out and make a whole bunch of 100 small rural water loans, for example. But they would be interested in investing in a fund where they know they may get 4 or 5% return. Mm-hmm. And if you are a pension fund or if you are someone where you're willing to park money in a safe place, having a rural business opportunity fund where you can park that money will provide access to more financing for rural America. And that's what the fund that was announced this summer is all about. And again, it's an opportunity for more of Wall Street to help finance rural America. And so CoBank, in partnership with the fund manager and also USDA, is a great way to leverage more opportunities for rural infrastructure. So.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Why don't you go ahead?
Hi, my name is Carolyn Kent, and I am from National 4-H Council. As part of 4-H, the nation's largest youth development organization, I am especially interested in successful strategies or what you have seen or what you hope to do with youth and inspiring them to be engaged in entrepreneurship in rural areas. I'm especially interested in kind of first-generation entrepreneurs, and also as rural America is changing and becoming more diverse, kind of just what you've seen in your communities or what the government is doing or what you see on the lender side in terms of incorporating youth in entrepreneurship.
Huge movement in rural youth entrepreneurship. 4-H has an entrepreneurship curriculum, which we see lots of people using, which I think is great. And it's one of several curricula that are available to educators right now, and there's a lot of talk and interest in this. Let's see here. What's his name? Boomtown USA, the author of Boomtown USA, Jack Schultz, is a big proponent of this and is also promoting a lot of connections between youth and teaching entrepreneurship through a program in Effingham, Illinois, that's getting a lot of national attention and going around. And so there's a number of players getting involved in terms of agencies and organizations, but I'm also just seeing, this is a very entrepreneurial generation that's in school right now. They're very interested. They need only the slightest push to make themselves entrepreneurial. And I'll give you a point that was raised to me by an educator from the SDAC group in Kansas who said, don't teach them about entrepreneurship, let them start the business. Much more important that they actually do the business than that they have any classroom lecture.
I would just add that there's a huge, I absolutely agree with the second point there, but I think that's a tenet of being a great teacher is, letting students do, and that's how they'll become inspired. And I also think that we are completely unfettered in terms of being able to have access to entrepreneurs who are doing all different kinds of things, right? My husband, he's huge in Illinois, not really, but he did tons of these Skype calls with classes, and they were looking for a role model, for an African-American role model who had started a business and could speak to his personal experience, right? And it really didn't matter that we were in Washington, D.C., okay? So he's doing these video calls with thousands of students who he got to speak to, and I think that sort of having that connection, it's better when it's in person. I believe everything's better when it's in person, but it also can help broaden the experiences that you can speak to. So certainly you can speak to those entrepreneurial experiences in the community, and should, and also we can use technology to our benefit to sort of be at the intersection of learning about what else is out there and sort of broadening horizons. And I think leveraging that is very important.
If I could add to that, the internet is the great equalizer, right? It really is. We're all trying to hit a home run in life, right? Some folks are born on second, some on third, and that's not fair. That's just how it is. But if you've got the internet and you're born in this great country, you're at least on first base, right? And you've got a shot, right? Access to capital, access to information and training, Kauffman Foundation, all kinds of thought leaders that are out there publishing great stuff. I would encourage these kids to go online, find their resources, both financial and informational. It is the great equalizer, and it's a great thing. It's a very exciting thing to be born in this time, in this place, because we have access to that.
I just want to say head, hearts, hands, and health. I haven't had a reason to say that in more than 40 years.
All right.
Great, Dave.
It's like my son, who's 12. I've already made him understand the fundamentals and the basic of being a young person in a rural farm, and understanding the pros and cons, the credits and debits. And as I say to him often, we get what we work for, and the world doesn't know any of us a living. I have a child that'll never talk or walk, and so I'm challenged each and every day, but I don't bury my head in the sand. I get up every day and I give it 110% tomorrow. As I have a motto, yesterday's history and tomorrow's a mystery. There's nothing we can do about yesterday, but there is something we can do about tomorrow. So keep plowing forward.
Great. Well, I want to thank these fantastic panelists for joining us today. Let's give them all a round of applause. Thanks again to the American Farm Bureau, the White House Rural Council, and everyone at Georgetown for putting together today's really important gathering, which is really still getting rolling today. So again, I thought the advice we got at the top was really important. Let's all make sure we meet some people we wouldn't have otherwise met, and take some impactful action together. Thanks again. Have a great afternoon.